Good evening. There is a diplomatic row in the making between India and Italy, and the feeling in India is that Italy has betrayed us. It has gone back on its word that all possible help would be extended for a fair trial to help get justice. Two Italian Marines facing murder charges in India will not return for trial according to the Italian Foreign Ministry. The Italians Massimiliano Lattori and Salvatore Gironi were part of an anti-piracy military security team and are accused of fatally shooting two Indian fishermen who they believed were pirates in February 2012. India allowed the Marines to travel to Italy last month to vote in the national elections, and they were scheduled to return to India. But the ministry said in a statement that India's decision to try the pair in India would violate their rights, in particular the principle of immunity for foreign state actors. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has termed the decision as unacceptable. The Italian ministry has claimed India had not responded to its requests to seek a diplomatic solution to the case, and there was now a formal dispute between the two countries over the terms of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on The Big Picture, we discuss the implications, both diplomatic and judicial, of the Italian ministry's decision of not sending the two accused Marines back for trial to India. Is it an act of betrayal? Did we allow the Italians too much leeway in sending them back home twice since the case came to fore? Does Italy and the Italian explanation have a leg to stand on as far as international law and legality is concerned? And what action should India take now that it is clear the two accused are not coming back? The answers to these questions and more on the show tonight. Joining me in the studio is Shankar Mukherjee, former ambassador. Also on the program tonight, retired Commodore Uday Bhaskar, defense analyst and senior fellow at the National Maritime Foundation. Sandeep Dikshit is a senior editor with The Hindu. He will join us live as well. There's one more guest who's going to join us, but I'll introduce him as and when he does join us. I'd like to start the show with Mr. Uday Bhaskar, if I could. First reaction, sir, then, on the rather blunt act of betrayal, if I can use that word. Should we have seen it coming? Did you, sir, see it coming at all?
Well, I would say that the way in which the Italian government has acted after having given the equivalent of an undertaking that the Marines would come back after the election duties were over would amount to the equivalent of a loss of credibility. That the action of the Italian government in taking this decision could also be construed as a contempt of court, because this was a case that was referred to the Supreme Court of India on the 18th of January, and in good faith the Marines were allowed to go back, which in itself, to my mind, was an act of considerable indulgence and generosity on the part of the Indian system, that merely for casting a vote they were allowed to leave India again. So I think there is a judicial dimension, which is the contempt of court. There is a diplomatic dimension, that India and Italy are two major nations who have a certain profile in the international system. And finally, I think, inasmuch as India has been addressing this case for the last year, there is a larger, what I would call as a politico-military dimension, which is specific to the maritime domain, that of using armed personnel on merchant ships and the way in which they are to be regulated. And in many ways, I would say that this is only the tip of an iceberg, which is what do you do in terms of dealing with the presence of armed guards, whether military or non-military, private military guards,
right,
on merchant ships, because this is a very gray area as far as international law is concerned.
Right. Mr. Bhaskar, it's a pertinent point that you've raised. Of course, I want to come back to that point a little later in the discussion. I want to come to Shankar Mukherjee first. Sir, your reaction on how the Italians have just decided unilaterally not to send them back. How do you read the situation?
Well, somewhat similarly to what my friend Uday said, but I'd go further than that. I think, to me, it is certain things are abundantly clear. One, of course, and I would just mention that in a second, because we need to look ahead, is that it was completely not in order for our authorities, whether it be the government or the Supreme Court, to mollycoddle these prisoners. If you arrested them because of a crime, then they should have been dealt with under the due process of law, not allowed to go for Christmas, not allowed to go to vote. Frankly, under Italian law, I think they can vote in their embassies, where they were in any case living in very great comfort, not in jail. This was definitely, the word you used, a betrayal, call it a betrayal, call it a breach of faith, it certainly was. It is also, I think, the seriousness that I'm underlining is because it is virtually unprecedented in the history of the last 4 or 5 decades of diplomacy. Certainly in my almost 4 decades of diplomacy that I can recall, a state like Italy, one of the oldest, well-established states of the world, reneging on its political and diplomatic undertaking given to the Supreme Court of a country like India, where law and order is well established. And then going back on it in what I consider, and this is my most serious point, I am utterly and totally convinced that this entire thing was premeditated. This question of getting them back to vote, which is a flimsy excuse, in retrospect.
They never meant to send them back.
They never meant to send them back. There was a game plan in position that we will get them back. We will then stonewall. We will talk about initiating a diplomatic dispute mechanism.
Right.
We will, I mean, there are many, many ways of stonewalling these things.
Absolutely.
So those are the things we have to now deal with.
Right. Sandeep Dikshit is also with us, senior assistant editor with The Hindu. Now, Sandeep, India acted in good faith. We send them back twice, once for Christmas, once to vote in the national elections. Were we too accommodating? I know it's easy to sit here in the studio and make a judgment in hindsight, but it's a national issue. It was back then. It still is a national issue. Do you think because traditionally India and Italy have had very friendly relations that there was no cause for concern then with the way the government acted on orders of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, there's no such thing as friendly relations. Relations are based on give and take between sovereign nations. So let's dispel that impression that someone is very friendly or someone is not. And the second thing is, as Ambassador Mukherjee has pointed out, this never happened in recent diplomatic history, where if you look at the Supreme Court's order and if you look at the affidavit submitted by the Italian ambassador, he has said that he will take care, he will ensure that these people attend court hearings at every date. So this was a major, major loss of trust, a breach of trust if you put it. And going beyond this, this is going to have major repercussions in Italian-Indian relations and maybe even spill over to the EU for that matter. But as Ambassador Mukherjee has pointed out, this was indulgent behavior to under trials, which is never extended to Indian under trials who are in jail and awaiting trial. They are never allowed to go out anything, and here we see the bonds were gradually loosened. From the jail they went to a guest house, from a guest house they went to the Italian embassy in Delhi, and from the Italian embassy in Delhi on this, as you say, a flimsy excuse, tell me which under trial in India is let out to vote. And they were allowed to go back to vote despite the fact that there was a provision for postal balloting at the embassy itself.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned the Italian ambassador. Now, reports say that the Ministry of External Affairs is going to summon the Italian ambassador Daniel Mancini to India over the Marines issue. And in an undertaking, like you very rightly mentioned, Sandeep, he submitted to the Supreme Court. The envoy had taken responsibility to ensure that the Italian Marines will return to India for trial. That hasn't really happened. Now, coming to Mr. Mukherjee now, legal experts say that there is a case of contempt to be made against the 2 Marines. In that case, is there also a case of contempt against the Italian ambassador because he gave a personal guarantee and he failed to deliver?
Not really. Diplomatic immunity really supersedes that. He has diplomatic immunity. He's protected. So the movement forward for India will have to be a number of diplomatic and political measures. There are measures which one can enumerate. For instance, you start with summoning the ambassador means precious little because in a situation like this, he acts as a post office. His response will simply be that I've noted your protest and I will convey it to my government.
Just the messenger.
He's just the messenger in this case because that is the safest role he has. You could up the ante in a number of ways. You could up the ante directly with Italy by doggedly pursuing this case diplomatically. You could take it up with the European Union's Court of Justice. You could brand them absconders under various sections of the Indian Penal Code and alert Interpol. All this basically to put pressure on the Italian government. You could also, and I say this having been around in situations where you really can't use anything else except diplomatic tools, you could also make it clear to Italy's partners, the partner states in the European Union, which preens itself on its record in human rights and adherence to law and order, that this will have a repercussion beyond Italian borders and beyond Indo-Italian relations. India has many times done humanitarian things, done things for humanitarian reasons. And that in future, if such a situation arises with some other European country, the first thing that will occur to us will be the Italian experience. And would they like that?
And we've got to make it clear to other members of the European Union that this will not fly.
Absolutely. So that's the job of the Ministry of External Affairs and our diplomats abroad. And I'm sure they will pursue this.
I want to get Air Commodore, retired Air Commodore Uday Bhaskar in here. Sir, what started, it seems, as a disagreement between the two countries over jurisdiction, that was the issue, now is now a full-blown, pretty much a full-blown international dispute. Now, Italian Foreign Minister Giulio Terzi had hailed the Supreme Court's decision when the Supreme Court allowed them to go back as evidence of mutual trust, a climate of mutual trust between the two countries. At the same time, now Italy's foreign ministry has said that its request that it sent to Italy to agree and pursue a bilateral dialogue to reach a diplomatic solution had gone unanswered. Now, hence the decision now to keep them there. Italy seems to be singing two different tunes at the same time. Is this a classic case of misdirection then? And like Mr. Mukherjee said, that they never intended them to come back to India.
Well, it is evident if you look at the way in which the Italian government, beginning from February of last year, when this tragic incident took place where 2 Indian fishermen were killed, and their subsequent articulation as the case moved from the Kerala High Court, and then we came all the way up to the Supreme Court in January of this year, there have been more than one occasion when the Italian government, through its representatives, has actually acknowledged the Indian judicial system and made some very favorable comments. But I go along with what Ambassador Shiv Mukherjee had just said a little earlier, that clearly, given the political dynamic within Italy, because you will recall that from December of last year, this particular Marines issue had become a major electoral point in the domestic context of Italy. And the previous government had been accused of having been very weak in terms of standing up to India. And my own reading is that between roughly, I would say, December of last year, the Supreme Court's decision in Jan of this year, the Indian Supreme Court, that there would be a need to set up a federal court, because they made one observation that this case cannot be tried by the High Court in Kerala, and that the center should set up the equivalent of a federal court. My reading is that this is the point when there was a political decision in Rome that they will get the Marines back, maybe for elections, which was the public kind of position they had taken, and that once that was done, they would use this diplomatic kind of reason, saying that India is not agreeing to the equivalent of a diplomatic resolution to this issue. So that is the point where I think the politics of Italy have come into this. And I repeat this point, it is very unfortunate because we cannot have a situation at a time when globalization is moving in the way it is, that major countries invoke domestic politics not to adhere to the practice of law, international law. And once you come into the maritime domain, I think this has some very, very significant long-term implications, which is why I think India should move ahead in a very calibrated way, saying that do we respect law? If so, can we arrive at a consensus on how this respect for law can be reflected?
Point taken, sir. We'll take a small break right now. There's another guest joining us. After the break, we'll get the legal perspective, the judicial perspective as well. But that's after the break. Keep watching The Big Picture. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Big Picture. Ranjeet Kumar, Senior Advocate at the Supreme Court, has also joined us on The Big Picture. Many thanks, sir, for joining us on The Big Picture today. My question for you is this. The Prime Minister has taken a serious note of the matter now. He has termed it unacceptable and has asked his External Affairs Minister to actively pursue the issue. Salman Khurshid says now that the government will have to see the reasoning behind the Italians' logic for not sending them back and then formulate a game plan, then go forward. Does the Italian reasoning, sir, have a legal leg to stand on? They have cited terms of the United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea. Throw some light on that if you will, sir.
Well, I would like to say first of all that a person who cannot abide by an undertaking given to a court of law is a person who should not be spared, and the Prime Minister is absolutely right in saying that something like this is not acceptable. You see, a person goes to court, pleads for an order. The order is opposed by the council appearing for the state of Kerala, and despite that the court grants him a liberty only to take part to go and vote in the election, and then he gives an undertaking through his ambassador that he will come back here, and an undertaking is recorded in the order. Then a country or his men who cannot abide by an undertaking given to a solemn undertaking given to a court of law is a country which must be dealt with very severely, and it has nothing to do with any convention. Because if there was a convention thing which they wanted to invoke, they should have done so in the first instance. Why did they not take up the issue of convention before? Why did they plead on a ground that I want to go and vote? Why did they earlier plead that they want to go for Christmas with their family?
Right.
Once you give a plead and say, you have shown first that I will go and come back, and then you again on that basis, court believes you. The belief of the court is lost.
Right,
The
sir. We take
faith
your
of
point.
the court is lost in a person like this who gives an undertaking to the court and then runs away.
We take your point, sir. We take your point. You have a perfectly valid point there. I want to go back to Sandeep Dikshit right now. How is this going to affect bilateral relations, Sandeep, between the two countries? You mentioned before that this is going to spill over to the EU and Indian relations as well. We've had a long-standing, you said before that there is no such thing as friendly relations, but we've had a long-standing relationship with the Italians. This could endanger, and Mr. Mukherjee will bear me out, endanger years and years of work done between the two countries. How do you see this affecting bilateral relations?
Yeah, first of all, if you take the issue of United Nations permanent seat on which all of us have set our heart on, Italy doesn't support India. Italy is with Pakistan in a thing called United for Consensus, or the Coffee Club, which opposes this UN Security Council permanent seat for India and other countries in the format that India wants. And the second thing, as you said, you asked the legal luminary, there were 3 points which Italy and India were discussing. The first was extraterritorial application of law. Both countries have extraterritorial application of law. India under section 4 of the Indian Penal Code, but this place was 5,000 kilometers away from Italy and a few kilometers away from India. So India says that their law should apply. The second argument by the Italians was that under Article 97 on UNCLOS, the ship that is flying the flag, so the country whose flag the ship is flying, the prosecution should take place there. India says this is misinterpretation of section 97, article 97 of UNCLOS, because article 97 deals with collisions and all these accidents. It doesn't deal with willful firing. And the third point that Italy said, that their marines had the right to be on the ship and to attack pirates. As Commodore Uday Bhaskar has pointed out, this is a grey area. But the Indian diplomats, when these talks were going on, Italy is really suppressing the truth when it says there's been no diplomatic talk. There have been talks for hours and hours. So on this third point, India says that armed persons should be aboard a warship and not a cargo ship.
Right.
And it falls into a grey area because the Italian Parliament had passed a law which allowed the positioning of these marines on these ships. I am sure Commodore Uday Bhaskar will have more to say on this.
Right. I will go to Commodore Uday Bhaskar. I must correct my mistake. I referred to him as Air Commodore before. That, of course, is not right. He is Commodore retired Uday Bhaskar. Yes, sir. Your views.
I think I want to extend the point being made by Sandeep, which is what is the way ahead. I think for a start, India and Italy will have to take stock and not allow this to spiral out of control, because we are already in a situation where public opinion is clearly ahead of what the government has been able to do. We are still talking about summoning the Italian envoy and giving him what the Indian position is. At this point, I think the judicial issue, the way in which Italy is interpreting the shared jurisdiction and the stand taken by India is, I think, at the heart of this particular long-term issue. And how India, the Prime Minister has already made a statement saying that it's unacceptable, which means that there is now a certain compulsion for India to move the political levers. One presumes that the Indian Foreign Minister would be talking to his counterpart, and from there I think it is really going to be a challenge to quarantine this. And my own sense is that if some quiet diplomacy and some political consultation could be brought to bear, so that the contempt of court issue is really addressed in the most appropriate manner.
Right.
Because the more this stays in the public domain, we will have both countries taking positions from which they cannot resile.
Absolutely.
I hope the two Marines come back and the Italian government makes a solemn commitment that they did not intend to carry out the equivalent of what could be termed as a contempt of court, because that has larger repercussions, and perhaps friends of Italy could also counsel them as to how to bring down the political temperature in their own country so that this goes along due process of law, and where there are grey areas, they will be addressed by the competent specialists on both sides.
Right.
That's the way I would recommend that we should really, I think, go ahead.
I want to come to Ambassador Mukherjee right now. Even Italy, sir, must realize now that endangering a long-standing, if not friendly relationship is not in their interest as well. How do you think they can play this one now? Do they really have options now, or have they played their cards slightly too early and there is no way they can come out of this, not smelling bad?
Well, let me first say that, on the legal side of things, our learned advocate on the panel has hit the nail on the head. The question is nothing to do with the law of the sea or anything like that. The question is to do with breach of faith of a sovereign undertaking. The ambassador is an ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary, which means he has plenipotentiary powers, which means that his undertaking to the Supreme Court was an undertaking given by the Italian government. So there's no escaping that. When you say doesn't Italy realize about the kind of damage it will do to itself perhaps and its image, I think the decision was taken cold-bloodedly and in a premeditated fashion. In international relations, a nation is a government. The government deals with foreign policy and international relations. Italy is a country that is perpetually, more than any other country that I can think of, is in a perpetual state of elections. In fact, many call their elections not elections, but cabinet reshuffles. So they are playing to the Italian voting public. Indians don't vote in Italy. So they've taken a conscious decision that certain things can happen. The Indians will growl. They are practiced diplomats. They're a very large country and a respected country, but we'll weather the storm, but let's go ahead and keep them here. Now, the fact is, we must now home in, as Mr. Ranjeet Kumar said, on the breach of faith and the illegal act that was committed by a sovereign government not adhering to its legal commitment given to the highest court of the country. That is what we must concentrate on now and not get distracted by questions about the law of the sea at the moment. Once they are back, all kinds of things can be considered. The trial can move ahead slowly or whatever. But the present objective of our diplomacy should be that we want them back. They were arrested here, they were in Indian waters. Whatever you have to say, come and say it here. We are not going to mistreat them until these things are sorted out.
I want to get Ranjeet Kumar's opinion very, very quickly, sir, very briefly. We don't have much time left. What legal recourse does India really have, even internationally? What can India really do? Explore legal options?
Tell me.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, there will be a contempt petition filed, I think, by the Kerala government in the Supreme Court with reference to a violation of an undertaking. That's the first thing that that comes to my mind. I don't know whether they will do that or not. Secondly, it must be impressed, as was rightly said by the ambassador just now, that it must be impressed upon the Italian government that anything that you want to take on the, any objection or any plea that they want to take on the basis of international covenants and international treaties and or going to an international court or the UN resolution, that has to come only after the Marines have come back here. Because the Marines have not gone out on the basis of any such international covenant or the international plea that they are not bound by Indian laws.
Right.
They have submitted to the jurisdiction of Indian laws. That is why they pleaded to the court that I want your order that allow me to go. Once you have submitted to that jurisdiction and then violate and take up some other plea which was not taken at this juncture is the thing which they have done wrong.
Right, Mr. Kumar, thank you for those that opinion. Of course, I have about 30 seconds left. And Sandeep, Dikshit, I want to come to you first. I have about 30 seconds for you. What about India's response, Sandeep? What is the best course to take for India? Already, social media is abuzz with angry reactions. The press, the media is extremely critical of the government, that decision to send them back. The opposition is breathing down the government's neck. What course does really India have? 30 seconds, Sandeep.
Hit where it hurts, that is economics. Shut them out of government contracts for the time being. And also realize that this is part of a pattern of the West. Neither David Headley came back, nor Tabahur Rana came back, nor Kim Davis came back. They are also not going to come back. And similarly, the Americans killed an Indian fisherman of Abu Dhabi in July 2012. We have not heard anything about that.
Right.
Part of the Western pattern, a superiority, if you wish.
Right. Wrap this up for us. I have about 15 seconds for you.
Well, I'll just extend that by saying that it is a pattern. It is a pattern even amongst themselves. There are extradition cases pending between US and the UK and Brazil and the UK. But to wrap it up, all I would say is we must do all this. I mean, we've discussed various measures. There are diplomatic and political moves available. But let us do that in keeping in mind the fact that a government of a substantially important country like Italy may not respond to all these measures. It may not send the Marines back. We may not get them back. But through these measures, we can at least make sure
that it never happens again.
That A, it shouldn't and probably wouldn't happen again, but B, that the government of Italy pays the price in terms of its international image.
So I have to wrap the show. I have to stop you there. I must thank all my guests before we go. Ranjeet, Kumar, many thanks. Sandeep, Dikshit as well. Commodore, Uday, Bhaskar, thank you so much for joining us, as Shiv, Shankar, Mukherjee as well for coming to the studio. Hit them where it really hurts. That's economics. That's one option. And I think that is the key takeaway tonight. Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night. And thank you for watching The Big Picture.